Alina Noor didn't believe in fate, not after life had handed her nothing but broken dreams and overdue rent, but when her car broke down in the middle of nowhere, just as the sky cracked open and rain poured like the heavens were punishing the earth, she had no choice but to accept the ride offered by the very man she couldn't stand. Zayan Shah, the billionaire CEO who had mocked her independence, challenged her pride, and criticized every inch of the charity gala she was planning for his company. He had been the storm in her life long before the weather decided to match, and now, soaking wet and shivering, she found herself standing in the marble foyer of his remote mountain estate, a place too far from the city for rescue and too cold to ignore the heat that flared when their eyes met. Two enemies trapped in luxury, alone for the night, surrounded by silence, snow, and secrets neither of them were ready to admit. The fire crackled in the hearth, but the real tension burned between them, and though she wrapped herself in a wool blanket and sat across the room, every minute stretched with the weight of unspoken feelings, with memories of the countless times they'd fought across boardrooms and banquet halls. He was everything she hated, wealthy, controlled, emotionally unavailable, yet something in the way he glanced at her now, softer than usual, like he wasn't just seeing a woman in his house, but someone who had found her way under his skin, made her chest ache with confusion. When the storm refused to stop and the night refused to end, they were left with no choice but to talk. And it was in that talking, hesitant at first, that the walls began to crack. She told him about the father who'd left, the business she'd built from scratch, and the loneliness she carried like a second skin. He told her about his mother who died too young, the betrayal of his fiancée who married his brother, and how every room in his mansion echoed with silence no wealth could fix. For the first time, they weren't enemies. They were two broken people hiding behind armor that no longer served them. As midnight drew near and the power flickered off in a dramatic sigh of surrender to the blizzard outside, Alina followed Zayan's lead to the backup generator room. But a fallen tree had knocked out the signal entirely. No phones, no internet, no way out until morning. And it was in that moment of forced stillness, lit only by candlelight and the low hum of emergency lights, that something shifted between them. Zayan, normally cold and composed, looked at her like she was not just real but necessary, and Alina, who prided herself on her strength, found herself trembling, not from the cold, but from the terrifying warmth of wanting to be held. "I don't like people," he confessed, eyes fixed on the flames, "but I don't feel that way with you." She didn't know what to say, not when her heart was thudding against her ribs like a warning. Not when every breath felt like an invitation to cross a line she wasn't sure they could ever uncross. When she finally asked him why he always pushed people away, he looked at her like the question had never been asked before. And after a long pause, he whispered, "Because the last time I let someone close, they shattered everything she wanted to tell him that she wasn't here to shatter, that she'd been broken too many times to ever do that to someone else." But instead, she walked over, sat beside him, and rested her head on his shoulder in silence. That simple act broke something open in him, and for the first time in years, he leaned into someone, not for pleasure or power, but for peace. They didn't kiss. They didn't touch beyond that. But in the quiet, in the ache, in the stillness, something sacred bloomed. When morning finally arrived, the world outside was blanketed in white, the storm gone, and yet the storm inside them had only just begun. Alina woke to find Zayan gone from the living room couch and a steaming cup of coffee beside her, and for a second she smiled, until she read the note, "Had to take a call. You can leave if you want. The driver's waiting. No apology. No thank you. No, please stay. Just distance. Just cold. Just Zayan, again retreating into the fortress of himself. And it broke something in her chest she didn't even know had healed overnight. She left without saying goodbye. She threw herself back into work, into clients, into forgetting. But forgetting wasn't possible when every corner of her apartment reminded her of the sound of his laugh, of the way his eyes softened, of the moment he let her in. Weeks passed, and he didn't reach out. But she heard from others that he'd canceled meetings, ignored events, and had even donated anonymously to a women's shelter she'd once mentioned loving. Her heart warred with her pride. Should she go to him, or let him go like all the others who had chosen fear over feeling. Just when she decided to erase him completely, she received an envelope. No sender, just her name in handwriting she recognized instantly. Inside was a photograph of the two of them, snapped by security cameras in the cabin. Mid-laughter, firelight flickering behind them. On the back, I should have asked you to stay. Unable to ignore the ache any longer, Alina arrived at Zayan's office, ready for closure. But when she entered, she didn't find the cold man she remembered. Instead, he stood by the window, disheveled, eyes haunted. And when he saw her, he didn't speak, didn't smirk, didn't pretend. He just looked at her like a man who had lost something irreplaceable. You were the only person who ever saw me and didn't want something from me, he said quietly. And I sent you away. I always send people away. I don't want to do that anymore. She crossed her arms, wary, protective. But when he stepped closer, his voice cracked. You were asleep that night, he murmured, and I looked at you like a fool in love with someone he didn't deserve. I whispered, please stay, but you didn't hear me. Maybe it's too late now, but I need you to hear it while you're awake. Tears threatened her eyes because she had waited her whole life for someone to ask her to stay. Not for convenience, not for lust, but for love. And in that moment, all her walls came crashing down. She touched his face, and he leaned into her palm like a starving man. And this time, they didn't need to speak. The kiss was slow, aching, desperate, a reunion of souls who had known each other far longer than this lifetime. They didn't get married right away. They didn't rush into happily ever after. But Zayan learned to be present, to choose vulnerability over pride, to love her not with gifts or grand gestures, but with consistency. Coffee in the morning, forehead kisses before work, holding her hand in silence when her childhood memories overwhelmed her. Alina, in return, taught him how to laugh again, how to hope again, how to live in the small moments and trust that he wouldn't be left behind. They rebuilt her business together, not because she needed help, but because he wanted to be a part of her world, not pull her into his. They traveled, danced in rainstorms, adopted a rescue dog, and every night before she fell asleep, he whispered it again. Please stay. Not because he feared losing her, but because saying it reminded him how close he had come to never knowing this kind of love. She always whispered back, I'm not going anywhere. And in that quiet promise, repeated night after night, they proved that the most powerful love stories don't begin with perfection. They begin with a storm, a fire, a whisper in the dark, and the decision to stay. Even as their love deepened, not every day was easy. Zayan struggled with the ghosts of his past, and Alina had her own fears of abandonment that crept in when least expected, like shadows at noon. Sometimes, they argued, over small things like forgotten dates or misunderstood silences, and sometimes over bigger wounds that neither of them had known how to voice. You still think I'll leave you, Alina said once, her voice breaking as she stood by the window, the city glittering behind her. Zayan swallowed hard. And you still think I'll shut you out, he admitted. But every fight ended not in slammed doors or bitter silence, but in them choosing to come back, to talk it out, to hold each other even when the pride screamed no. They started therapy, not because they were broken, but because they wanted to learn how to love better, how to grow together. Zayan would scribble notes after sessions and stick them on her mirror. You are my peace. I'll never stop choosing you. Even when I don't know how to show it, I love you. Alina would slip handwritten letters into his briefcase, reminding him that he wasn't his trauma, that he was worthy of being loved without conditions. Slowly, the cracks became part of their mosaic, and their love became not about perfection, but about showing up, again and again. Everyone expected Zayan Shah to propose on a yacht, or in Paris, or with a dozen cameras ready to capture every angle. But he surprised everyone, even Alina, by doing it on a quiet Sunday morning in their kitchen, flour dusting the counter, pancakes half burned in the pan. I had a whole plan, he said, kneeling beside her as she laughed with batter on her cheek. But I realized, this, us now, here, is already perfect. She froze, spatula in hand, blinking as he took out a velvet box with shaking fingers. I don't want a moment that feels like a show. I want a life that feels like home. You are that for me. Tears filled her eyes as he opened the box to reveal a ring as simple and stunning as their story. A gold band shaped like a winding vine, delicate and strong. Alina Noor, will you marry me, not because it's perfect timing or a fairy tale, but because we've already lived through the storm, and I want to wake up every morning knowing the woman beside me stayed? Her answer came in a whisper, choked with joy. Yes, 1,000 yeses. And as he slid the ring onto her finger, they both knew the real proposal had happened long ago. When he'd whispered, please stay, and she'd decided to. Marriage didn't solve everything. Zayn's company hit a scandal that threatened everything he'd built, and Alina's health took a turn that left them both reeling. Doctors murmuring about complications, surgeries, and uncertain futures. But they clung to each other harder. When Zayn faced the media, she stood beside him, head high, hand in his. And when she went into the operating room, he held her hand until they took her away, whispering again and again, stay, stay, stay. She woke up hours later to find him asleep beside her bed, fingers still wrapped around hers. The fear didn't disappear overnight, but it became smaller each time they walked through it together. They traveled less, laughed more, and learned the quiet rhythm of shared lives. Grocery runs, late-night giggles, falling asleep mid-conversation. And then one spring morning when she'd long given up hope, she held a tiny test in her trembling hands and burst into tears. I'm pregnant, she whispered. And when Zayn turned to her with disbelief, his knees buckled and he cried in her arms like a man who had never believed joy like this could belong to him. You stayed, he kept saying. You stayed, and now you've given me everything. Their daughter was born on a rainy night, not unlike the one that had started it all. And as Zayn held her for the first time, tears streamed down his face as he whispered, You're the reason your mother saved me. They named her Amina, meaning trust, because she was the promise fulfilled, the answered prayer, the proof that broken people could build something beautiful. Alina, watching him cradle their child, thought back to the cold, arrogant man she'd once hated and realized that love had turned him into something soft, fierce, and utterly devoted. He wore baby carriers over his designer suits. He hummed lullabies during board meetings. He kissed Alina's stretch marks and called them battle scars. Their home echoed with laughter, spilled juice, bedtime stories, and once a week, even during chaos, he'd look into her eyes and whisper, Please stay, as if he still couldn't believe she was real. And every time she'd reply, I'm already home. Years passed, seasons changed, and their love only grew. Through heartbreaks and holidays, through growing pains and second chances. Amina grew up watching two people who loved imperfectly but endlessly, who chose each other daily, not out of habit but from devotion. When she asked once at 16, How did you know it was forever? Zayn smiled and looked at Alina like he still saw her the way he did on that first stormy night. Because I asked her to stay, he said, and she did, even when I didn't deserve it. That night, long after their daughter had gone to bed, they danced slow in the living room, gray streaks in their hair, wrinkles near their eyes, but with hearts still wild for each other. And when he pulled her close, kissed her temple, and whispered like he had so many times before, Please stay. Alina smiled through tears and whispered back, Always. As the years unfolded, Alina and Zayn turned their shared pain into purpose. They launched a foundation for women who had been silenced, broken, or forgotten, because Alina had once been that woman, and Zayn knew the guilt of watching it happen. We'll call it Stay, she had said, because sometimes all someone needs is a reason not to give up. They hosted quiet dinners instead of gala events, listened more than they spoke, and poured their wealth into hearts instead of headlines. Zayn stepped back from boardrooms, trading spreadsheets for school pickups and bedtime routines. And Alina, once the girl afraid of her own worth, became a voice for thousands, standing tall beside her husband, her daughter watching with pride. They didn't chase perfection, they created peace. Their mansion never echoed with emptiness. It buzzed with warmth, with music, with meaning. They had each other, and they had built something bigger than wealth or status, a family, a mission, and a forever that felt earned. But even the strongest love is not untouched by time. One winter, Zion's health began to falter. Nothing dramatic, just the quiet signals of a heart that had once been shattered and now beat slower, softer. Alina noticed first. The way he held the staircase railing a little longer. The way his laughter sometimes ended in a quiet breath. And though fear crept in, she never panicked. She just held him tighter, wrapped his pills in sticky notes that said, "I'm not ready to do this life without you." Zion, ever the warrior, fought with calm and grace, because he'd already won the war that mattered: love, forgiveness, peace. And when he grew tired, Alina read to him. Sometimes poetry, sometimes letters from their daughter, sometimes just the silence between words, filled with everything they didn't need to say anymore. And when she cried, he held her, even when it hurt, whispering, "You made me more than a man. You made me whole." On a golden morning soaked in sunlight, they sat in their garden, wrapped in wool blankets, surrounded by flowers Alina had planted with her bare hands. Zayan leaned his head on her shoulder, fragile but smiling. "Remember the night we got trapped together?" he asked, voice like velvet, weathered but warm. She laughed, wiping a tear. "You mean the night you annoyed me half to death before falling in love with me?" He chuckled weakly. "Exactly that." They sat in silence, the breeze playing with her hair, the air filled with birdsong. Then as the sun climbed higher, Zion exhaled slowly, peacefully, and whispered one final time, "Please stay." Alina kissed his forehead, tears falling freely, and whispered back, "I will. I always will." And though his body rested, his soul didn't leave. It lingered in every room, every memory, every heartbeat she carried forward. The days after were a blur, of flowers, of mourners, of long pauses in the middle of the day, when the weight of his absence hit her like a crashing wave. But Alina didn't crumble. She mourned with dignity, holding Amina close, guiding her through loss with the same strength that once saved Zion. And though the bed was colder and the house quieter, Alina filled the silence with legacy. She continued the foundation. She wrote a book called Stay, telling their story not as a fairy tale, but as a testimony of flawed humans who chose love again and again. The book touched millions. It healed others. It reminded them that true love isn't loud. It's loyal. And every year on the night they first met, she lit a candle, made pancakes, and whispered to the wind, "I stayed, Zayn. I'm still staying." Amina grew into a fierce woman, brilliant, bold, and kind, her father's eyes and her mother's soul. On her wedding day, Alina gave her a necklace that once belonged to Zayn and whispered, "He's walking with you today." The crowd didn't see it, but as Amina reached the altar, a gust of wind brushed through her veil, and for a moment she swore she felt a presence, a warmth that filled her chest. That night, when Alina returned home alone, she stood by the garden where Zayn once said goodbye and smiled through tears. "You didn't really leave, did you?" she murmured. And deep inside, where grief and love lived side by side, she heard the answer. Not in words, but in the way the stars shimmered a little brighter, in the way the wind wrapped around her like a hug. And just like that first night, she whispered, "Please stay." And in her heart, he did. Years passed, but Zayan's memory never faded. It echoed in Alina's every breath, in the soft creak of the floorboards he once walked, in the quiet laughter that still filled their home. She kept his chair at the head of the table, never empty, always adorned with fresh roses or jasmine, depending on the season. "He loved jasmine," she'd tell her granddaughter, little Nori, who'd tug at her dupatta and ask, "Did Grandpa Zayan love you this much?" Alina would kneel, touch her heart, and reply, "More than the moon loves the tide, my John." And though time lined her face and softened her step, her spirit never dimmed. Because love like theirs didn't end. It transformed into memory, into legacy, into the sacred way she still spoke his name in prayer every night before sleep. In the attic of their home, Alina discovered a chest she hadn't opened in decades. Zayan's old journals and a bundle of letters he had written to her, but never given. Each one was dated. Each one ended with, "Please stay." She read them slowly, letting each word sink into her like rain into dry earth. There were letters from their first fight, from the night he found out she was pregnant, even from the day he bought her favorite earrings, but pretended he forgot their anniversary. He had written his heart in silence, preserving his love in ink. Alina compiled them into a book titled Letters He Never Sent, a love story told in hidden pages. It became a sensation, not because it was poetic, but because it was real, because it reminded the world that sometimes men cry too, and love isn't always loud. It's written in margins, saved in drawers, whispered in empty rooms. Alina became a quiet revolution. Women traveled from cities and villages just to hear her speak, not because she was famous, but because she had survived. Her voice carried the weight of loss, but also the tenderness of having been loved truly. Grief, she would say on stage, is just the other side of a great love story. If it didn't matter, it wouldn't hurt. And each time she shared her story, another woman found the strength to walk away from pain, to start over, to believe she was worth staying for. Alina was no longer just Zayn's widow. She was a healer, a guide, a flame that lit the path for others. And still, every speech, every award, every standing ovation, she'd whisper to the wind before stepping on stage, "This is for you, my love." On the night of her 80th birthday, her family threw a quiet celebration in the garden Zayn once adored. Amina gave a speech, full of warmth and wit, while Nouri played the violin softly under fairy lights. After the guests left, Alina sat alone under the stars, wrapped in her shawl, the moonlight kissing her cheeks. And then she saw it, a single shooting star, slicing across the night sky. She smiled, her heart full. "Still showing off, aren't you?" she whispered, tears slipping down her wrinkled cheeks. In that moment, she didn't feel old. She didn't feel alone. She felt held, as if the universe itself paused to honor a love that defied time. "I stayed, Zayn. You never really left." Not long after, Alina fell ill. Nothing sudden, just the gentle winding down of a heart that had lived enough, loved deeply, and left nothing unsaid. She asked for no hospitals, no machines, just home. Her last days were spent in her bed, sunlight pouring through the curtains, the scent of jasmine filling the air. She told her granddaughter bedtime stories of a man who once got trapped with a girl and ended up finding his forever. "What happened next?" Nouri would ask. Alina would smile, close her eyes and say, "He stayed." And so did she. On her final night, surrounded by family and warmth, she whispered the words she had said 1,000 times in her life. "Please stay." And for the first time, she heard an answer. Not in the wind, but deep inside, like a voice that had always lived within her. "I never left." The day Alina passed, the sky was oddly golden. Amina swore she smelled her mother's perfume in the air. The jasmine in the garden bloomed all at once, even though it was out of season. And that night, Amina dreamt of her parents dancing under starlight. Zayn in a white shirt, barefoot in the garden. Alina in the same pink dress she wore the night they first met. They weren't speaking. They didn't need to. Love like that didn't need words anymore. It just was, as constant as gravity, as infinite as sky. Their home eventually became a museum, not grand, just sacred. Visitors walked through rooms filled with letters, photos, journals, and the original sticky note that read, "You're annoying, but I think I like you." On the wall in Alina's handwriting were the words, "They were trapped together all night, and in that one night they were freed forever." And beside it, in Zayn's script, "Please stay." Every year on the anniversary of their first night, strangers from all over the world came, lit a candle, and promised to fight for love like that. Not perfect love, not easy love, but real, staying, soul-deep love. The kind that whispered across lifetimes, "I'm still here." Years later, little Nouri, now a grown woman herself, walked through the same garden, holding her daughter's tiny hand. She showed her where Grandma Alina used to sit, where Grandpa Zayn planted his first jasmine tree, where love had once bloomed so loud the whole world eventually heard. They got trapped together one night, she told her daughter, but what they found was something most people search for their whole lives. In her heart, Nouri carried their story like a sacred inheritance, proof that even in a world of noise, temporary lovers and fleeting promises, there once existed a love so steady, it stayed. And in staying, it changed everything. Underneath a marble plaque in the garden, beneath the blooming jasmine vines, rested two names side by side, Zayan and Alina, with only one line engraved beneath. They stayed. Noor placed a flower there each year, not out of grief, but in celebration, because theirs wasn't a tragedy, it was a triumph, of patience over pride, of forgiveness over fear, of choosing to stay when walking away might have been easier. And so their love became legend, whispered by wind, immortalized in ink, and carried by those who still believe that the right soul doesn't just come into your life,